In the world of heavy metal, which was characterized by strong boos, cigarette smoke, and guitars screaming in frantic rage, there was one man who was the indispensable spirit of it all yet didn't quite fit in. He was not noisy. Never went to a party or ran after the stage's glistening lights. With his wild, untidy hair, flared 70s trousers, a philosophy book in hand, and his bass instruments seemingly welded to his body, it was Cliff Burton. At the age of 24, he disappeared, leaving Metallica fans with a hole in their hearts that no one could ever fill. He had come like a strange, burning star. But why did this solitary, outdoorsy misfit who avoided attention end up becoming a legendary figure in rock history? What was the source of that ferocious yet poetic bass sound he produced, music so potent that it briefly caused the universe to hold its breath? Cliff Burton was not a famous person. He was a shock to the system. And in every note, every tear, and in the hearts of people who once thought rock was more than just sound, his story, beautiful, terrible, and sacred, remains alive. It was a soul. Childhood. The only sound that disturbed Clifford Lee Burton's youth in Castro Valley, California, where he was born on February 10, 1962, was the piano resonating from the living room. Growing up in a middle-class household that valued literature and the arts, Cliff was surrounded by classical symphonies, battered poetry books, and an open sky that allowed his imagination to run wild rather than shouting or fighting. He had a sister named Connie and an elder brother named Scott, making him the youngest of 3 children. Before the first catastrophe occurred, everything appeared to be calm. At the age of 16, Scott passed away due to a brain aneurysm. That sorrow deeply etched itself into Cliff's delicate, sensitive spirit at the age of 13. No cries or rebellion were heard. Just a silent boy with his bass guitar in his hand, like he was shouting his brother's name. He promised himself something right then and there. To honor my brother, I will strive to become the best bassist. It wasn't a dream. It was a promise. Unlike other youngsters, Cliff practiced until his fingertips bled in his room for hours on end, rather than pursuing friends or sports. He lived the bass, not just learned it. He found solace in music, a realm where suffering was turned into rhythm and the indescribable could reverberate through the strings. Cliff loved philosophy and classical literature in addition to music. He was able to read H.P. Lovecraft while listening to Bach, and then without any sense of contradiction, switch to Black Sabbath. He believed that beauty and darkness coexisted in the world rather than being separated. Maybe that's why Cliff would go on to become one of the rare metal musicians who could blend the tremendous power of his bass lines with poetry, sorrow, and classical grace. His teachers characterized him as intelligent yet odd. The child who always carried a book and smiled gently and distantly, as though the world could never quite reach him, was humorously referred to by his pals as an ancient soul. But Cliff had one thing that the world would never be able to take away: his passion for music and his unspoken promise to his sibling. It was a little flame, silent, steady, that burned inside a youngster and would one day set the metal world on fire. Early career. When Cliff reached adolescence, he followed his own route, which led directly into the heart of music, while his peers followed fads in popular music or young revolt. Where a whole life narrative may be told by the bass's rich, resonant notes. Since then, every band Cliff joined has been engulfed in a peculiar energy that is not loud or explosive but rather eerie and persistent, like a dream you can't wake up from. He didn't learn to play bass to perform, it was his method of expressing himself. Cliff started performing with a number of local Bay Area bands, such as Easy Street, where he shared the stage with Jim Martin, who would go on to play guitar for Faith No More. But it wasn't until he joined Trauma, a growing metal band, that Cliff started getting noticed as a really unique and noteworthy bassist. Even though Cliff was standing at the back of the stage, he attracted everyone's attention with his long hair, denim jacket, and bass tone that seemed to come from the bottom of the ground. Cliff's bass screamed through the auditorium as 2 Metallica members, Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield, sat in the audience, exhausted and disillusioned, during a Trauma performance in Los Angeles in 1982. They had never heard anything like it. The entire room is awakened by a bass solo that uses a wah-wah pedal that sounds like a guitar but is still rhythmically anchored and incredibly deep. Cliff transformed the bass into a soul-screaming instrument. James and Lars almost immediately understood they had to bring Cliff into Metallica, but Cliff wasn't in a hurry. He was surrounded by his loved ones, friends, and the music scene in San Francisco, where he was living nicely. Cliff made an unimaginable demand because Metallica was then situated in Los Angeles, which he famously called fake and soulless. Nobody in Metallica anticipated that. However, they ultimately came to an agreement, which permanently altered the band's course. With Cliff's official joining of Metallica at the end of 1982, the band evolved beyond a young bunch of Anglo-American heavy metal riffs. They got an additional depth with Cliff that distinguished them from all other bands of the time, an introspective, intellectual, and artistic dimension. Cliff didn't say much, but every arrangement and songwriting idea he gave caused the group to re-evaluate how they approached music. Cliff Burton never made an effort to distinguish out, but in that cacophonous world, it was his serene demeanor, the way he held his bass like a silent prayer, that kept people's attention. Successful career. Cliff Burton's career took a turn for the better when he joined Metallica. Not with loud proclamations or ostentatious gestures, but rather with the silent and unique power of his presence. Walked in like someone from another world, bringing with him classical education, a poet's soul, and a bass guitar played as if it were an extension of his own heart, while the rest of the band continued to charge forward with the raw, rebellious spirit of punk and thrash. Metallica's explosive 1983 debut was highlighted by the release of Kill 'Em All, but for Cliff, it was the first time he brought the bass out of the background and into the foreground. Pulling Teeth and Anesthesia weren't a one-man show. It served as an introduction and a manifesto for the individual. This is how I tell tales, and this is who I am. Cliff turned the bass into a main instrument by using wah-wah pedals, distortion, and tapping, whereas other bands considered the bass as only a supporting element. He also used wild yet sensitive whispering and screaming. Nobody else in metal had the audacity to do it at the time, and with only one song, they completely changed the way that people thought about bass. Cliff, however, contributed more than just skill. He started developing Metallica's musical identity with Ride the Lightning, 1984, by adopting a profoundly philosophical outlook. He believed that Cliff did more than simply play. He also proposed harmonies, frameworks, and emotional arcs in songs like Creeping Death, Fade to Black, and For Whom the Bell Tolls carried not just the weight of metal, but also soul. The bass opening, which is frequently confused for guitar, rang out like a death knell, drawing listeners into a desolate, limitless universe, especially For Whom the Bell Tolls. For someone who viewed music as a form of spiritual expression, this was instinct rather than merely creative. Cliff found inspiration in Hemingway's writing. From themes of life, death, and conflict, and wove them into dark, brooding soundscapes, something no one else in metal was accomplishing at the time. Cliff did more than improve Metallica's songs. He made it more heartfelt, agonizing, multi-layered, and profound. Like a subterranean stream seeping into the ground and altering the entire terrain above, it was a complete but silent change. Then followed 1986's Master of Puppets, where Cliff achieved his artistic zenith and made his imprint on what would be his last complete album. It was one of the best albums in metal history, not simply Metallica's masterpiece. Cliff's heart pounded fiercely in the instrumental Orion, a wordless composition that spoke louder than words, deep within its rage and despair. Orion was his musical will, as if he knew this would be his final opportunity to convey all left unsaid, from the thunderous beginning that sounded like stars colliding to the agonizing midsection where Cliff's bass lead like a lost soul looking for home. As James Hetfield famously observed, just listen to Orion if you want to understand who Cliff was. You can hear the anguish, the loneliness, the pride, and the want to escape in every bass line, pause, and rumble. From an artist who never truly belonged to this world, yet made one of the deepest marks upon it. Cliff maintained his reserved demeanor even as Metallica gained popularity, opened for Ozzy Osbourne, received overwhelmingly positive reviews, and attracted admirers from all across Europe. He had no desire for wealth or notoriety. Behind the scenes, he read literature. He wrote handwritten notes to his girlfriend on tour buses. He spent his leisure time taking solitary walks and taking in the scenery. It appeared that he only saw fame as the cost of creating music that was authentic to who he was. And for that reason, Cliff Burton became an indispensable artist to a whole generation, not just Metallica. He guided metal into profundity, into philosophy, into music as a spiritual experience, and out of its shell of plain rebellion. Cliff just played and made the world listen in a way it had never heard before, while everyone else was still shouting to be heard. He appeared on just 3 albums, yet with those 3, Cliff Burton reinvented the role of the bass in rock. And the metal community shuddered when he left, not just because they had lost a band member but also because they had lost a musical soul who had the ability to transform quiet into the most eerie beauty. Personal life. Cliff Burton's personal life contrasted sharply with the public's preconceived notions about rock musicians, even though he was a member of one of the most rebellious and energetic metal bands of his era. He led a modest life, shunned ostentation, and eschewed the glitzy parts of the music business. Cliff had a serious romantic relationship with Corinne Lynn, his girlfriend throughout Metallica's ascension. His close associates attested to the stability and serenity of their relationship. Despite his dislike of ostentatious demonstrations of emotion or romantic gestures, Cliff always showed his partner calm, considerate care. Although Corinne stayed mostly quiet after his passing, it is well known that she was heartbroken and never really healed. In order to honor her as a significant part of Cliff's memories, his family kept in touch with her. Being honest and grounded with friends and other Metallica members was a hallmark. He was once described by James Hetfield as the band's moral compass since he didn't hesitate to voice his opinions when they conflicted. Cliff had distinct personal boundaries but was not combative. He shunned anything phony or shallow, detested partying, and avoided the self-destructive habits that many rock performers of the day were prone to. He would frequently read in his spare time rather than go to backstage parties. His friends were well known of his passion for J.R.R. Tolkien's writings, philosophy, and classical literature. His devotion to himself was also evident in his personal style. Cliff continued to wear his flannel shirts, long hair, flared trousers, and faded Converse sneakers while the other band members started to change their appearances to meet the expectations of the crowd. He didn't care if it made him stand out and never made an effort to blend in. Although Cliff didn't have many close friends, those who did know him well respected him. Cliff took some time to warm up to you, but once he did, he was honest and real. He prioritized music and his own integrity above all else, and he remained true to that belief until the end, according to everyone who worked with him. The tragic accident. Metallica was in the midst of their Damage Incorporated European tour, which was at the height of their career at the moment, promoting Master of Puppets, on September 27, 1986. The band took a bus to Copenhagen, Denmark, for the night after their performance in Stockholm, Sweden. The roads were slick, the fog was heavy, and it was extremely chilly. About 6 in the morning, a tragedy occurred. In a barren area close to the village of Ljungby, the tour bus veered off the road and overturned on its side. The majority of the band members had just minor injuries when they woke up from the collision. However, there was no sign of Cliff Burton within the bus. They were horrified to learn that he had been flung through a glass and pinned underneath the vehicle. James Hetfield was among the members who hurried around the site, shouting for assistance and attempting to ascertain what had happened. It was all for nothing. At the age of 24, Cliff passed away instantly. The fact that Cliff was only put in that bunk because of a simple draw the previous evening was one tragic circumstance. Members of Metallica would select who would get which bunk each night by drawing cards. Kirk Hammett was initially assigned to that seat, but Cliff traded places with him after he drew the winning card that evening. Nobody could have predicted that a seemingly insignificant choice would have such a disastrous result. Swedish authorities did not discover any obvious signs of ice at the scene, despite the bus driver's initial assertion that the vehicle had slipped on black ice. No one was ever charged, despite later allegations that the driver might have lost control or fallen asleep. The indescribable sorrow of losing someone regarded as Metallica's musical essence at such a young age was more important to the band and its fans than the precise cause. Cliff's passing shocked the entire metal scene worldwide in addition to leaving the band in emotional shock. Many found it hard to believe Cliff, who led a clear, balanced life and appeared to be immune to the common traps faced by rock stars, could pass away in such a commonplace manner. The way the career of such a promising artist was cut short just as it was starting to take shape was unfair, harsh, and brutally sudden. After Cliff's passing, Metallica gave the idea of disbanding serious thought. However, following weeks of destruction, they decided to go on in his honor rather than to replace him. According to James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and the other members, Cliff's influence permeated every aspect of Metallica's existence after that, from their musical philosophy and compositional seriousness to their lifestyle and approach to success. On October 7, 1986, Cliff's funeral took place in California. His remains were incinerated, and his remains were dispersed in a private area close to his house. Orion, the instrument he so profoundly influenced, was played at the service as a somber, silent farewell. Legacy and influence. Cliff Burton only made 3 appearances on Metallica albums, yet his influence is far-reaching. Cliff introduced a totally different approach, brilliant technique, classical musical thinking, and, above all, the ability to use the bass to convey intense emotion, a component that was sometimes disregarded in metal bands of that era, to a genre that was famed for its ferocity and speed. Prior to Cliff, the majority of metal bassists provided a strong basis for rhythm, but they were rarely in the foreground. Cliff didn't feel that way. He turned the bass into a vehicle for individuality, unrestricted imagination, and even emotional guidance. Songs like Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and Orion in particular demonstrated more than simply his technical mastery. They demonstrated that the bass might take center stage in a song's structure. Cliff's impact went beyond just music. Future metal musicians' perceptions of their own positions were altered by it. Numerous well-known bassists, including Steve DiGiorgio of Death Testament, David Ellefson of Megadeth, and Robert Trujillo, who would later replace Cliff in Metallica, have recognized Cliff as a significant influence. This is not only because of Cliff's playing style but also because of the spirit of freedom, honesty, and inventiveness that he personified. Cliff's influence on Metallica persisted even after his death. To Live Is to Die, a song from the 1988 album Justice for All, was included as a tribute to him. A spoken word segment in the song is based on a poem that Cliff wrote and that is mentioned in the CD booklet. Despite the criticism around the album's notably too low bass mix, many people think it unwittingly represented the emptiness Cliff had left behind, a presence too large to fill. In addition to his music, Cliff came to represent the unyielding artist. He made the decision to live simply, adhere to his convictions, and never alter who he was to meet the expectations of others in a field full of temptation. Because of this, Cliff Burton is regarded as more than just a great rock star, he was a true artist who stood for more. Cliff was honored together with the other original members of Metallica when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009. On his behalf, his parents, Ray and Jan Burton, accepted the honor. Cliff loved music, Ray stated in a succinct but moving address. It wasn't a job. He lived it. And I believe he's still playing somewhere. Those words serve as a lasting truth. Cliff Burton's legacy doesn't lie in what he owned or achieved during his lifetime, but in the way his music continues to resonate, reshaping a genre, inspiring thousands of young musicians, and being remembered not because he tried to be great, but because he simply was. Cliff Burton, never truly gone. Cliff Burton passed away at just 24 years old, but what he left behind didn't end with his funeral. In the years that followed, and still today, his name lives on not just in the memory of Metallica fans, but as a cultural icon within the metal community. He stands as proof that staying true to music and to oneself can outlive a person's lifetime. No one kept that flame alive more faithfully and warmly than Cliff's father, Ray Burton. For many years after Cliff's death, Ray continued to attend music events, fan gatherings, memorials, always ready to speak with anyone who loved his son. Even in old age, he traveled on his own, shook hands with fans, and spoke about Cliff with a calm voice, tinged with pride but never boasting. To fans, Ray wasn't just the father of a legend. He was the guardian of Cliff's spirit, preserving his character in the most genuine and humble way. In 2018, Alameda County, California, where Cliff was born, officially declared February 10 his birthday as Cliff Burton Day. It wasn't marked by fireworks or grand stages, but by fans around the world sharing old songs, memories, photos, and above all, gratitude for an artist who lived and created on his own terms without compromise. That same year, Cliff's family partnered with Castro Valley High School to establish the Cliff Burton Music Scholarship, supporting students passionate about the arts who faced financial hardship. The scholarship didn't require outstanding grades or exceptional talent, just true passion. And that, above all, was what Cliff himself lived for. Beyond official tributes, Cliff Burton's fan community continues to grow worldwide. Tribute videos, Orion covers, and hundreds of heartfelt comments are shared every year on his birthday and the day of his passing. On music forums, is still remembered as an artist who was never truly replaced. Even though Metallica went on to achieve enormous success with other members, Metallica too has never let his name be forgotten. At major performances, Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield often speak of Cliff, pay tribute, and sometimes even perform Orion as a spiritual rite. There's no stone monument built in his honor, but the music he left behind is his immortal gravestone, stronger than any statue. Cliff's death was not just a personal loss for Metallica. It was a symbolic loss for an entire generation of artists. Artists who believed it was possible to live authentically, create without compromise, and leave a mark without ever walking the beaten path. Cliff Burton never tried to become a legend. He didn't seek the spotlight, didn't change himself to please the crowd, and never lived for applause. Yet it was that very simplicity, that unwavering conviction of a man brave enough to live true to his soul, that made him immortal. In a world of music that thrives on noise, Cliff chose calm. In an industry obsessed with glamour, he chose depth. And in a band on the fast track to massive success, Cliff preserved a quiet space for himself, where art could exist in its purest form. He was with Metallica for only 3 years, 3 albums, a brief chapter. But that presence was enough to alter the course of an entire genre, enough for his low, resonant notes to keep echoing, not just in music, but in how future generations understand what truly matters. Authenticity, pride, and an identity that cannot be replaced. Cliff Burton didn't die at 24. He simply stopped there. The rest of him, his melodies, his principles, and that quiet yet enduring inspiration, still lives on in the hearts of millions of music lovers. What are your thoughts on Cliff Burton? A quiet artist whose influences felt so powerfully, what part of his short but profound life moves you, makes you reflect, or resonates with you most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe this story deserves to be heard by more people, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to join us in honoring those who lived and burned brightly, if only for a moment, but left behind a light that never fades.